A lot of the workforce planning projects that I've worked on are in certain areas. So healthcare, they have the nursing shortage. Oil and gas, they have engineer shortages. Utilities have an aging workforce, so they're always concerned with retirement. But one of the most interesting projects that I've worked on was actually in a shrinking business. So in an industry that's dying, and what they wanted to do, it's a brand name company, but in a bad industry. And so they didn't want to lay anybody off. So they were very concerned with RIFs. And so the workforce planning project was to really figure out how they could sustain their model but not have to lay anyone off. So the interesting thing about it was they knew that they had a very aged workforce. So they knew that if they could last 4 or 5 years, they would be okay. Because while they were shrinking, they were also moving into different markets. So they were looking at different R&D opportunities which would sustain them into the future, but in the very short term, they needed a plan to be able to move their workforce around. And really, some of the divisions were very big, but others were right-sized. And they needed a way to get from where they were now to where they needed to be in 5 years with this innovation. And so what we did is we went in and looked at their workforce. They had about 10 different divisions. And we took people who had moved between each division. So if you had moved from Division A to Division B, even if it wasn't part of the normal career ladder, we looked at those people and then tracked back what they had done after they had moved. So we looked back 5 years. Anyone that had moved from this division to this division, we really looked at their performance. Were they successful? Even if it was in totally different lines of business. So if you had moved from, say, sales to finance, we would track that and really look at where those successes were. And then we looked at the divisions that were too big and looked at the areas where those people could be redeployed within the organization to really provide the best opportunity for success. And so it really turned into not just, here's the people we need to get rid of, here's the people we need to hire, but what I would call a true talent management. Here's where we can redeploy people. They might need to be trained in the other part of the organization, but here's where they have the most chance for success within the organization. And like I said before, it was a very old workforce, so that they knew that if they could last 1, 2, 3 years with this new model, that enough people would retire that it would get them down to a level where they wouldn't need to lay anyone off because they really didn't want that bad publicity. So we did that. We looked at all the different people, came up with a plan for them to move people around or at least give opportunities, and then people were told whether they had a job still within their current organization or not. If not, then they were given opportunities to move throughout the organization. And then only as a last option were they given a package and actually asked to leave the organization. So it worked out really well. Enough people retired given they provided some packages for people to retire, and enough people retired that, that they were able to make it through this downturn without having to lay anyone off. Another interesting part of the story is that moving into the R&D from a more typical old-fashioned company, they really needed new skills. And so to figure out what skills they needed and how they were performing in that, they needed to figure out what the good analytics were for looking at who was being successful and how they were performing in the new world. And so we worked with them to help define, okay, here's where the business strategy is going, here's how that translates into the human capital strategy, and given that strategy of wanting to be an R&D focused company, here's the metrics that you need to look at to make sure that you're there and that you're doing okay with that. And so instead of looking at traditional metrics like revenue per employee, they started looking at R&D spend per employee or number of patents created, and non-traditional metrics, but really ones that were helping them to get from where they were now to where they needed to be in the next several years to really get to that R&D type culture to be successful into the future.